Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moppin coming at you again with another A-Push video. This is our fourth one, focusing in on topic 9.3, the end of the Cold War. Now, you might be watching this and thinking, well, hold on, didn't we just end the Cold War in the last video? Well, yeah, but, understand that, when the Cold War ends, there's going to be a very important transition into what is going to start to define global affairs in the 1990s and beyond. And one of the questions is, what will happen with international crises when there is not an American-Soviet Cold War dynamic in play? A lot of times conflicts all over the globe were kind of viewed through that paradigm of how is this going to affect, Soviet-American relations. Well, now that the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, it does create something new. And one of the effects of this is that there's no longer two superpowers. There's one superpower, the United States, and that's it. And one of the, of course, important questions to ask is that, if you remember, why did we, end isolationism after World War II? It was mostly to stop the communist menace around the globe. Well, now that that menace has been thwarted, basically, does the United States revert back to pre-World War II style isolationism? Well, the answer is no. America goes the other direction. It takes on a mantle of being, since they are the sole superpower now, of kind of being that leading moral voice to try to protect peoples around the globe. Now, some will criticize this as America becoming like the global police force, if you will. But George H.W. Bush at the time describes this as part of really a new world order where the United States, in this new framework, this new landscape, where the United States doesn't have to worry anymore about nuclear war, doesn't have to worry about the Soviet Union anymore, can take this opportunity to promote democracy and to protect democracy where it already exists. And this is going to have an impact on what's going to be happening in the fall of 1990. In the fall of 1990, we're going to be seeing the small but super wealthy and oil-rich country of Kuwait down here in the Middle East be invaded by Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein, just pretty much straightforward, wanted Kuwait for the oil. Kuwait did not have any kind of real military, and Iraqi forces just roll in to take it. Now, this was about as blatant a land grab as we had seen since the end of World War II. And there really was no justification for it other than just straight greed and power. And so in this first kind of test of, will national borders be protected after the Cold War, George H.W. Bush is going to be saying, we are going to protect the sovereignty of Kuwait. Not that Kuwait is a democratic country, because it's not. But the idea of protecting a peaceful country and respecting their borders. And after months of trying to get Saddam Hussein to leave and refusing to do so, we will see American forces, which had started to accumulate here on the Saudi-Iraqi border by early 1991, begin its invasion to liberate Kuwait. And it will be a pretty easy operation for the United States. Now, Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq, had done a lot of saber rattling and threatening of the mother of all wars that the U.S. attempts to retaliate. And in fact, when we do invade Kuwait, Iraq does shoot some missiles towards Israel to try to draw Israel into the fight and then make it some kind of holy war or whatever. But we're able to convince the Israelis to stay out of the fight, and we do our job to try to liberate Kuwait. And it works pretty easily. Iraq's vaunted Republican Guard and, Scud missiles are going to be a disaster. They're going to be a joke. Within a matter of weeks, Kuwait is completely liberated. But one of the more fateful decisions of the Bush administration was, even though Kuwait had been liberated, no desire to actually go into Baghdad and topple the Hussein regime. Now, there will be sanctions on Iraq and a whole bunch of stuff in the 1990s, but Hussein will stay in power in Iraq, at least for the next few years. So what does this Persian Gulf War, as it will be called, what does it say? That it means that the United States is going to be on the forefront of protecting territorial borders. and that naked aggression is not going to be tolerated by the United States. Now, as we are seeing how the U.S. is going to respond to global crises, we are going to go back to Europe to see how the end of the Cold War is going to redesign what Europe looks like and how it operates. And one of these emerging changes is going to be the creation of the EU, the European Union. And what the EU was designed to do was to create a more economically unified Europe. The idea being is that if these various European countries are tied together economically, that means that they all have a very important vested interest in maintaining good relations. If you're making money together, you're not nearly as likely to go to war with each other. And so that was kind of the idea behind that. And it really starts with mostly Western European countries, which were far more economically successful than Eastern European countries because of the Cold War. And as you can see here on this map, you can see these countries in yellow, plus Britain, were all members of the EU. It creates a single currency. It creates a bunch of agreements on trade and imports and stuff like that basically binds the continent together. Now, you've seen that the EU has expanded into parts of Eastern Europe in recent decades. And so the EU, is a very powerful institution now in the continent. It's viewed as a bit of a threat to Russia. But that's not to say that the EU is going to have all of its members be happy. Some of you may remember just a couple years ago that Britain voted to leave the EU, part of what was known informally as Brexit, because of a desire to have more independence on what they want to do economically. So even though Britain has left the EU is still, a very strong economic presence in Europe as a sign of, what's going to happen after the Cold War. Now, of course, another important change that's going to be taking place is the fate of NATO. Now, NATO was designed to be a military alliance, in essence, to defend against any type of communist aggression. And then the question becomes, okay, if there's no longer a European communist threat, do we still need NATO anymore? And the answer is yes, we still need NATO. And in fact, we want to make NATO even stronger. And one of the effects of the end of the Cold War is this very noticeable expansion of NATO from its, earlier members, these countries in blue that were some of the earliest members of NATO, to expanding it into the old Soviet Eastern European bloc. As you can see, these countries in the greenish colors have since been added to NATO. So as you can see here, all these countries that are now highlighted are all part of the same military alliance with us in Canada. That's a very strong, very powerful thing. Now, note, of course, which country is not in that, and that, of course, is Ukraine. And this is part of why Russia has recently invaded Ukraine, is to try to thwart any attempt by the Ukraine to join NATO, because Russia, for a long time now, not just during the Cold War, but since the Cold War, has viewed NATO as a threat. And as NATO has gotten bigger and bigger, Russia views NATO as, this ganging up on them kind of a sentiment. So, but one of the effects of the end of the Cold War is the kind of the bringing in of Eastern Europe into the fold with the rest of Europe in an economic and military sense. Of course, one of the important changes as a result of the end of the Cold War will be the dramatic shift away from the communist authoritarian regime of the Soviet Union and the embracing of a democratic Russia. Yes, you heard me, democratic Russia. And when we talk about democratic Russia, this was a new thing. Russia had never been democratic before. So it's not just the end of communism, but embracing something that they'd never even tried before, really. An actual democracy. And the man that's going to be leading this democratic movement in Russia will be Boris Yeltsin, located over here on the left. And Yeltsin is going to bring in free market economic institutions. He's going to be an open society politically. And, he's basically trying to make Russia to be much more like Western Europe. And in the 1990s, there was a real sense that not only was Russia no longer an enemy of ours, that we're actually starting to have friendly relations with Russia. Yeltsin and Bill Clinton were notorious for, laughing it up at various summits and meetings, and there was a sense that, oh my gosh, talk about a turnaround. Russia, not a threat, a friend, not an ally, not a member of NATO or anything, but, boy, has this changed. But unfortunately, in post-Cold War Russia, these attempts at a free market economy are going to be very, very difficult to be successful. You will see rampant inflation. You're going to be seeing, a lot of unemployment. You're going to see the gangsterization of the economy. You're going to see this vast separation of wealth between these billionaire oligarchs and everybody else. And so this idea that, free capitalism is going to make everything better for Russians doesn't quite come to pass. And so this makes Yeltsin not a particularly popular figure by the end of the 1990s. And we then see another, political leader by the name of Vladimir Putin, located over here on the right, who had been part of the KGB Soviet apparatus, come in with, a little bit more moderate policies, and he will be elected into power. Now, of course, 20 plus years ago, when Putin becomes the next leader of Russia, nobody really here in the United States had a sense of what Putin was going to become. And Putin didn't become the leader that we know today overnight. It's really going to be a slow transformation over many years. But Putin does not come to power through a violent, revolution, or anything like that. He is elected into power at a time where the Russian people are desperate economically. And it was done, it was done in a free process. And then, of course, the last thing I want to talk about, which is going to be the most horrific short-term effect of the end of the Cold War, and that is going to be the fate of the former Yugoslavia. Now, we mentioned previously that Yugoslavia was this kind of, just kind of arbitrary country that was formed after World War I that really didn't take into account, the ethnic makeup of these territories. But after the Cold War ends, you're going to see these various ethnic groups begin to form their own countries. And we talked about these last time, from Slovenia to Croatia to Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Macedonia, etc. Now, you might look at that and go, oh, okay, they figured it out. They've drawn their own ethnic-based lines of countries, and that's that. Well, as you look at this map here, not so simple, particularly in Bosnia-Herzegovina. As you can see here, Bosnia-Herzegovina does not have a nice, simple, ethnic, unified makeup. It is a mishmash of ethnic Serbians, ethnic Croats. A lot of these Bosnians are Muslims, whereas the Serbians are Orthodox and the Croatians are Catholic. And basically what happens is that you see Serbia, under the leadership of Slobodan Milosevic, basically say that he wants to unite all the ethnic Serbians. And, anytime anybody starts talking about we want to unite all the ethnic whoever's, that's usually a dangerous sign. And it will lead to war in Yugoslavia. And note, this is not just Serbian troops rolling into Bosnia-Herzegovina, and will also roll into Kosovo down here, mind you. But in an attempt to not just take territory, but engaged in ethnic cleansing, a desire to not just conquer the territory, but to wipe out and eliminate these Muslim minorities that are there, Bosnians and Kosovars, etc. And so we are talking about the use of organized rape camps. You are talking about mass executions. And yes, and you thought you'd never see these again, but yes, the return of concentration camps. These are Bosnian Muslim men that have been held in a concentration camp by the Serbians. So you are seeing things that you thought were left behind with the Holocaust, but coming back now in this post-war Yugoslavia. In the end, it will take the U.S. to intervene somewhat militarily and lead negotiations to end this conflict. Many of the top Serbian leaders will be arrested for crimes against humanity. And today, there's peace there. But throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, it was a horrific, horrific situation. So those are some of the important effects of the post-Cold War era. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.